the sea is history. Exodus, bones soldered by coral to bone, mosaics. That was the Ark of the Covenant. Then came the plucked wires of sunlight on the sea floor. As the white cowries clustered like manacles on the drowned women, and those were the ivory bracelets of the Song of Solomon, but the ocean kept turning blank pages, looking for history. Where's your Renaissance? It is locked in them sea sands, and in the salt chuckle of rocks with their sea pools, there was the sound like a rumor without any echo of history really beginning. The sea. Quoting Derek Walcott, editing a bit, to say welcome. Welcome to the Blue Pacific Caribbean CSW high-level event, Pacific and Caribbean women leaders championing Ocean Climate Nexus. This high-level CSW side event is sponsored by the Pacific Island Forum, the Office of the Pacific Ocean Commissioner, the Pacific Community, the Pacific Island Forum Fisheries Agencies, UN Women, the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, the CARICOM Secretariat, and the Kingdom of the Netherlands. My name is Tawny Broadmer, and I'm the representative for the UN Women Multi-Country Office in the Caribbean. Today is about women leaders who persevered, small island developing states, Little and Taloa, as they say in Jamaica, and the ocean. Today you will hear from prime ministers, ministers, and civil society organizations. Before we hear, first we listen with a prayer from the representative of the Anglican Diocese of Polynesia, Reverend Sepiuta Halapi Api, followed by opening remarks by the Pacific Island Forum Secretary General and Pacific Ocean Commissioner. Over to you, Reverend Halapi Api.
Isambula Vinaka, Malolele, Namaste, Talofa Lava Morena, and greetings to all our women leaders of our Pacific and the Caribbean. A reading from the Holy Bible, the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verses 28 to 31. This is a continuation of the story of creation after the fifth day. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may have dominion over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in God's own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." God saw that all he had made, it was very good. And there was evening, there was morning, the sixth day. The scriptures we have heard afresh today is to remind and encourage each one of us as women leaders that we are all made in the image of our Creator God. Male and female, we have been created in God's image and in God's likeness. And therefore we are encouraged with the important role that God has given us to be stewards of God's creation, the gifts of the earth. It is therefore our prayer today that in all that will be discussed, that we are inspired by God, our Creator and Redeemer of life, as part of his wonderful creation. Let us pray. Loving God, our Creator and Sustainer of life, we gather before you today with hearts of praise of your wondrous works and blessings in our lives and journeys. We gather before you, loving God, also with hearts of pain, hurt, and sorrow for all the challenges that we face each day as women. We pray for your creation, and especially for our homes, the Pacific and the Caribbean. We thank you for creating us in your image, but we also seek your forgiveness for our shortfalls and many a times when we have not lived in your likeness. We pray for the leaders of our nations and all who hold authority over our islands. We seek wisdom, humility, strength, and love be shown through their leadership. Loving God, we pray for all women, young women, and girls all around the world, and in particular in the Blue Pacific and the Caribbean. May those in power recognize our contributions, our gifts, our talents, our abilities to be involved in the important decisions that affects the lives of our people here today and the future generations to come. For Lord, when you speak, there is light and life. When you act, there is justice and love. Grant that your love may be present in the deliberations today, so that what we may say and what we do be filled with your Holy Spirit. This is our prayer. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Hala Api. Thank you so much for that beautiful prayer and the reminder. We will now have opening remarks from Mr. Henry Puna, who is the 10th Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forum.
Honorable Fiame Mataafa, Prime Minister of Samoa, the Honorable Evelyn Weavers-Crows, Prime Minister of Aruba, Minister Rosie Akbar, Fiji's Minister for Women, Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of CARICOM, Director General Dr. Manu Tupou-Ruzen, Ms. Ruth Spencer, Head of the Equality and Justice Alliance and Global Network for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Equality Fund, Antigua and Barbuda, Ms. Evangelista Apollos, Sea Women of Melanesia, Ms. Aisha Constable, Global Advisor to FRIDA, Ms. Elung Hidioyos of Palau, Bulavinaka, and Kia orana to you all. I am so delighted to join you all in my capacity as the Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum and also as the Pacific Ocean Commissioner. Thank you for taking the time to join us at this important event, organized by my officials here at the Forum Secretariat, the Office of the Pacific Ocean Commissioner, in collaboration with the UN Women in the Pacific and Barbados. This month, we celebrated International Women's Day with the important message of breaking the bias. It was a timely reminder for our team here at the Forum that gender equality is an important strategic pathway to a sustainable Blue Pacific tomorrow. Our Forum leaders have emphasized their commitment over the years to gender equality, and important progress has been made in all Pacific countries to address this. However, there is still much work to be done. The data tells us, but more importantly, our women and girls, our people and leaders tell us, we need to move beyond aspiration to action at scale to end gender-based violence, to bring balance to Pacific leadership at all levels, to address our global rankings near the bottom of the ladder on women in politics and near the top on gender-based violence. Your Excellencies, as we meet virtually today, I am reminded of the opportunities we now have to bring many more of our citizens with us on this annual journey to CSW. Through this online platform, we're able to bring home the intentional focus and power of CSW, not after the event, but in real time, to celebrate the milestones, but also, more importantly, to spotlight the increasingly urgent work before us. Increasingly urgent in view of the CSW66 theme, especially as we know that our Pacific realities confirm that women and girls are bearing the worst of the twin crises of climate change and COVID-19. This is more important now in relation to the ocean and climate nexus, with ocean priorities elevated in the Glasgow Agreement after COP26. The decision by COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland last year, outlining the important steps shown towards integrating ocean into the UNFCCC work program, is good news to large ocean states and all island nations of the world, because it means that our ocean story is now being heard and recognized. We have stated the solutions our ocean can offer for our sustainable development pathway, notwithstanding the triple crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and plastic pollution. The review theme is also a timely invitation to take note of women taking charge of work, paid and unpaid, that has ocean at the center. For those who are leading the way from the top of organizations and nations like yourselves, to the many whose livelihoods and communities depend on the sustenance of our Mother Ocean, collecting seashells, fishing, diving, sailing the high seas, mapping the ocean floor, or studying the different organisms living in the deep. Women are the holders of and communicators of knowledge, resilience, solutions, innovation when it comes to the ocean. The very first Pacific Islander to travel to the deepest part of the ocean in the Mariana Trench in northern Mariana, known as Challenger Deep, is a young woman from Micronesia. Nicole Yamase might have seen that as part of her work towards her doctorate, but that is a proud moment for all of us here in the Pacific, especially for a place less traveled. More people have been to the moon. It is for these less traveled places on Earth, in whatever aspect that will be, that you women leaders will definitely make an impact. This discourse is also part of that important work, highlighting your experiences as women, as leaders, as essential stakeholders in sustainable futures. For us, ocean is central in the Blue Pacific, and I know it is too for you, our sisters and brothers from the Caribbean. I understand the 4th BBNJ Intergovernmental Conference has just concluded last week here in New York. While the challenges in reaching agreement are many, I am glad that delegates from the Pacific and Caribbean have continued to collaborate in the advancement of SIDS issues through the Alliance of Small Island States. To the President of the Intergovernmental Conference on the BBNJ negotiations, Ms. Rena Lee, and the numerous women negotiators, including our very own from the Pacific, who worked very hard in the past 2 weeks, I say thank you to you all. And I wish you an ocean of strength and solidarity as you convene in August for what we hope will be the final session for the BBNJ negotiations. But for now, we're honored to have you here, our women leaders, to talk about how, together, we can best champion the ocean climate nexus. We look forward to hearing more about what drives you in this area of work and where you would like to see yourselves in the coming years. I wish you the very best in your discussions today, and I hope there will be some key takeaways for us all. And no matter the different regions we hail from, we're all one people, one ocean, and one blue Pacific for one blue planet. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Mr. Puna. And thank you for reminding us that while we may be at the bottom of some lists in some of our regions with regards to women's political participation, we're unfortunately at the top of other challenging lists. As we go on through this particular event, we are going to have remarks from our women leaders, prime ministers, and our ministers. And then after, we're going to have a reflection from the first woman Secretary General at the CARICOM Secretariat. As a Caribbean woman, I'm very pleased to be able to say that. After that, I will hand over to my co-moderator, and we'll have another session with our civil society colleagues who are leading the work. There you have Sandra Bernclau, who is a representative at the Fiji Multi-Country Office, and will be leading you through that next session. Please do understand some of our women leaders may have to step off. They are leading our work in very incredible ways, and the fact that they've given us this time, we very much appreciate. If you have any questions, please put them in the question and answer section on the Zoom chat, or please communicate them to the moderators in the chat. The first remarks come from the Honorable Fiame Naomi Mataafa, who is the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the beautiful island of Samoa. The Honorable Fiame Naomi Mataafa is the first woman Prime Minister in Samoa. She is also first as the Deputy Prime Minister of Samoa. She first entered into Parliament in 1985, and she is the leader of the Fa'atuatua Ile Atua Samoa Uatasi Party. I hope my friend Mele feels that I'm doing that Samoan right. We have among her many achievements. She is the Prime Minister currently in charge of Foreign Affairs, but she first joined Cabinet as the Minister of Education, Sports and Culture. She also served as the Minister for Women, Community and Social Development, as well as Minister for Natural Resources and Environment. Over the course of her political career, she has worked with many communities, governments, and organizations to advocate for women in leadership and for equal decision-making opportunities between women and men. The Honorable Fiame Naomi Mataafa will now speak to us on the importance of women's leadership in the Pacific and the role of women leaders in climate change and oceans advocacy.
Your Excellency, the Honourable Evelyn Weaver-Crose, Prime Minister of Aruba, the Honourable Rosie Akbar, Minister for Women and Children, Poverty Alleviation of Fiji, the Secretaries General of the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat and the Caribbean Community, Dr. Manu Tupo-Rusun, Director General of the FFA, moderators and fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. A week ago, the Pacific Women Lead program was launched. Its goal is that Pacific women and girls, in all their diversity, are safe and equitably share in resources, opportunities, and decision-making with men and boys. Promoting women's leadership is one of its three key outcomes, alongside strengthening regional gender equality efforts and realizing women's rights, including in health, economic empowerment, and safety, especially ending violence against women and girls. Despite considerable success, much more needs to be done. COVID-19 has exacerbated domestic violence and gender-based violence across all our Pacific countries. Our commitment and determination to defeat this issue must be from a whole of society approach. Community awareness and male advocacy training on gender equality remain central to the success of our joint endeavor. Any potential flagship program for women's leadership in the region must provide further impetus to implementing the many global and regional commitments that we have accepted over the past decades. And any program designed to promote women's leadership in the Pacific must apply an approach that is Pacific-owned and led, relevant to Pacific cultures and contexts, and underpinned by positive expressions of Pacific cultural values. Our Blue Pacific region is in a continuous state of change and progression, and supporting women's leadership in our countries and communities is key to reducing poverty, promoting economic growth and democracy, as well as increasing the well-being of women, girls, and their communities. Gender equality is not just about women. Any change for the better requires wider community engagement, women and girls included. A good understanding of national and regional contexts also determines how effective women's roles are in the climate change ocean advocacy nexus. A healthy ocean is essential to all life on Earth and is core to our Pacific way of life. Tied explicitly to our need for climate action is our custodianship of the world's oceans. Today, marine species and ecosystems are facing unprecedented threats due to human use and destructive practices. Our coastal ecosystems are champions at removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it in its soils. Yet these ecosystems and the creatures they support are threatened by rising water temperatures, acidification, overfishing, and commercial shipping. The ocean is now not only losing marine biodiversity and important ecosystem services, threatening the livelihoods of coastal populations, but is also less able to play its role of mitigating climate change. A new 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent will reinforce the prioritization of ocean and climate change considerations into all regional and national policies and plans. A shared ocean means shared responsibility and benefits for our environment, economies, and communities. We need to encourage legislators to connect the dots between climate and ocean issues that could help bring more climate-smart policy to life in a region whose population is passionate about its coast. The Pacific Ocean hosts a remarkable array of biodiversity, hence our Blue Pacific family must continue to prioritize both marine and terrestrial ecosystems restoration, as well as align action to tackle the climate emergency and address the threat posed by biodiversity loss. As leaders of our ocean environment, we need to set targets for protecting and restoring marine ecosystems as part of our commitments under the Paris Agreement. Samoa's marine protection goals in its ocean strategy are aligned to the Blue Leaders 30 by 30 campaign, calling to protect 30% of our global oceans by 2030. We welcome the complementarity of such initiatives. Securing our maritime zones against the threat of climate change-related sea level rise and preserving our existing rights and entitlements stemming from maritime zones is a fundamental importance to our Pacific region. Therefore, Pacific Islands Forum endorsed the Declaration on Preserving Maritime Zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise last year. All countries must unite to prevent and reduce marine pollution, including plastics, oil spills, discharge of waste and nuclear contaminants. Samoa welcomes the outcome of the UNEA 5.2 meeting that considered an internationally legally binding instrument by 2024 to end plastic pollution and other pollution prevention measures. Samoa lends its full support towards finalizing the work on the legally binding instrument on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction in a timely, robust, and effective manner. We need to elevate our perceptions of valuing women in the blue economy. After all, women play a vital role in making up the majority of workers in the blue economy sectors, such as in coastal, maritime tourism, and fisheries. They are responsible for more than half of small-scale catches in the Pacific within fisheries, and the blue foods play a big role in the provision of aquatic food that better serve children and vulnerable communities. Despite this, gender equality in ocean-related matters is severely lacking, and contributions are undervalued. Women are disproportionately affected by the risks in the related ocean-related sector, despite vast entrepreneurial potential that women play a crucial part in. Climate change is at the heart of our vulnerabilities as nations and peoples. As small islands, developing states, we face a unique set of vulnerabilities that impede our ability to fully achieve sustainable development. Structural factors, as well as exposure to climate risks and natural disasters, impact socioeconomic outcomes and our ability to achieve the SDGs. The pandemic has exacerbated those vulnerabilities, with many SIDS affected by the drop in international tourism and remittances. The call for and endorsement of a multidimensional vulnerability index will allow for the inclusion of more than just income-based criteria to assess eligibility for concessional finance, and provides for a richer lens on vulnerability. We acknowledge the joint leadership of the UN and Samoa and their partnerships in the development of the MVI. Climate change has no borders. It has and will increasingly cause loss and damage for small islands, developing states, and will continue to pose a threat on the sustainable development gains we have achieved. Women are agents of change in safeguarding the environment and protecting a broad range of stakeholders at local, national, and regional levels in averting and minimizing loss and damage associated with the adverse climate change effects. Hence, the urgency of scaled-up action and support to implement approaches that would minimize loss and damage is critical. Gender equality is central to climate change, not only because women make up half the world's population, but also because they are often the ones managing natural resources, and most are engaged in traditional and medicinal knowledge sources of ecologic systems. Women and girls are and will continue to be more vulnerable to the effects of climate change and environmental degradation. Climate justice helps us to put into context the significant impacts of climate change that we are already experiencing today. It links human rights and development to achieve a human-centered approach, safeguards the rights of the most vulnerable people, and shares the burden and benefits of climate change and impacts equitably and fairly. Experiences from the Pacific clearly show that efforts to work with communities to generate gender-sensitive responses and strategies for addressing climate change are more successful when they involve a number of well-coordinated responses from various partners and stakeholders. Success also depends on the recognition that climate change is a dynamic process, and that the men and women of the Pacific are not just victims of climate change, but active agents. Through their own gendered knowledge and actions, they can exacerbate or minimize the likely impact of extreme weather. Widened understanding of climate change risks will result in widening the spectrum of adaptation options to address our vulnerabilities. There needs to be greater emphasis on addressing gender in national budgets and public climate finance. The current gender discourse in the Pacific tends to emphasize gender mainstreaming into policies and laws, but not into the budgets of Pacific Island countries, thus ensuring that the gender mainstreaming gains in the Pacific translate into tangible benefits for women and communities. Transparent tracking of climate finance flows builds trusts between the providers and the recipients, and will facilitate an enabling environment for real transformative changes to take place in communities. Supporting local women's-based organizations is critical because of the networks they have established, their understanding of the context, as well as the needs and the solutions that work well in their context. Factors that affect the social web of society should be investigated properly to inform climate action and the integration of gender. Local mechanisms and institutions provide a safe space for women to be involved and express their ideas. Climate finance providers and development partners must recognize local mechanisms and prioritize for support. Ladies and gentlemen, there is much to discuss on these very important issues, but time is also of the essence. Thank you very much for this opportunity to contribute to our discussions today.
Thank you so much to the Honorable Prime Minister of Samoa for her insightful words that demonstrate the way in which she has been the epitome of leadership and service in her life. As we continue to connect the dots around climate, oceans, and gender, I'm extremely pleased to be able to introduce our next speaker, the Right Honorable Evelyn Weaver-Crose, who is the Prime Minister of Aruba, another first woman Prime Minister in a small island developing state, in particular, Aruba. Prime Minister Weaver-Crose was born on December 5th and was the first daughter of her parents. She is a lawyer who studied in the Netherlands, and on her return to Aruba, immediately started to do a lot of the work that the Honorable Prime Minister Fiame Matafa just spoke to with regards to specializing in tax law and supporting the work on tax inspection, serving as the head of that department in Aruba. After a successful career in the public sector, she took up another role in the Parliament of Aruba. Through the general election, she became one of the first, as I said before, women prime ministers in the Caribbean and the first in Aruba. And I would also like to say this particular prime minister as well has been leading efforts to develop a gender equality policy in Aruba, bringing together and connecting these dots. Thank you to the Prime Minister of Aruba for joining us. And I look forward to handing over to you as we discuss a little more with regards to the role of small island developing state leaders, especially women leaders like yourself, being at the forefront of climate negotiations.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon or good morning to our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you for the opportunity of speaking to you today. Climate change is happening. It is affecting us right here and right now. I have seen the devastation the increased cyclones and hurricanes are causing to our islands. As for Aruba, particular risk is induced for our natural ecosystems. Our coasts are eroding. Our corals are bleaching. Our weather pattern is changing, and these affect the Aruban society as a whole, including our tourism industry, which we fully depend on. How climate change is disproportionately affecting women and girls has already been clearly highlighted during this 66th session of the CSW. As it stands now, women are currently still at a disadvantage and the previously slow gains towards equality was set even further back by the devastating COVID pandemic. As female leaders in SITs, it is imperative that we sit at the table and that we have our opinion heard and valued, as we know and we feel best what our women and children need. We need to decisively express our needs, ensure that we are part of the climate solutions and gender equality equation. And even though our contribution to climate change is negligible, we need to show that we have island-based solutions. Our women and children cannot continue being the most affected while their interests are not being heard. We believe that equipping women with the right skills by improving access to high quality and sustainable jobs will help create greater economic security for women and improve our societies. Yet, the technology sector is still male-dominated, while this is where the future job opportunities lie. Our government has taken concrete actions to address island-driven scientific solutions to prepare our younger generations for the future job market. We have combined this with targeted intervention to ensure participation of women in STEM fields. Through a concerted effort, the University of Aruba established a new faculty, STEM faculty, which stands for Sustainable Island Solutions through Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, a bachelor, master, and PhD program. And we are very proud to say that this STEM faculty and teaching team is comprised of more women than men. And we have also seen an increasing participation of female students. We have also taken structural actions to lift both the standards of living and the empowerment for women and girls. With the support of UN Women, the Office for the Caribbean, we recently completed the first gender policy for Aruba. And we have focused on 4 areas. The first, to overcome structural barriers to gender equality. The second, to increase decent work opportunities. The third, to enhance access to justice. And the fourth, gender-sensitive healthcare. As small islands, we need all the support and we need to work together to include all needed solutions to create resiliency within the context of the structural constraints and several aggravating factors and obstacles to recovery. I thank you for your attention, and I'm calling on you to join forces and take coordinated actions to make our islands more inclusive and more climate resilient. Only in unity we will be able to make a change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. More resilient, more inclusive. This is the only way in which we'll be sustainable. It's such a pleasure to be able to be with all of these women leaders who are talking the talk and walking the walk, from understanding education, being transformational, and making the connections between all of the different ways in which we must be inclusive and climate responsive. The next speaker is the Honorable Rosie Akbar, the Minister for Women and Poverty Alleviation in Fiji. The Honorable Rosie Akbar has been a government minister since 2014, with broad-based experience in leading and managing the key ministries of health and medical services, education, heritage and arts, and holding twice her current portfolio in leading the government's work on ensuring an equal, safe, and inclusive environment for Fijian women, children, persons with disabilities, and other marginalized groups. In these roles, Minister Akbar has been instrumental in leading government policy formulation and implementation on critical issues related to health, women's empowerment, child protection, poverty alleviation, and education. Everything that we need to build forward equal from the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change impacts. Minister Akbar is a champion for women's leadership. She is passionate about gender equality, particularly ensuring women and girls in the Fiji and Pacific are provided with equal opportunities and are able to lead safe, violent-free lives. She's also a strong advocate for social inclusion. Minister Akbar is going to be speaking to us today, this morning, this evening, for those of us in the Caribbean, on the impacts of climate change on women and girls and the need for inclusive climate financing. Over to you, Minister Akbar.
Thank you. Honorable Prime Minister of Samoa, Honorable Prime Minister of Aruba, Your Excellencies, distinguished panelists, Ni Sambula Vinaka, and a warm Pacific greetings. I am delighted to be part of this important side event that tells the story of women's leadership in championing the ocean climate nexus in our two regions. As a representative of the Pacific Island Forum Chair, Fiji, I am here to reaffirm the region's commitment to women's leadership on issues very pertinent to our livelihoods, our people, and islands of the Blue Pacific. Our people of the Pacific and Caribbean are custodians of over 42.75 million square kilometers of ocean. And we all know that ocean plays an important role in the lives of many women throughout the Pacific and the Caribbean, serving as a source of food, livelihood, transportation, and identity. Therefore, leadership of women in climate change, ocean management, and in contributing to gender-responsive climate resilient policies is the key. The decision by COP26 outlining the crucial measures taken towards including ocean into the UNFCCC work program is fantastic news. It signifies that our ocean story is being heard, but we must not stop here. We must continue to advocate and influence high-level political and policy decisions. Small island developing states, such as those in the Blue Pacific and the Caribbean, are among the world's most vulnerable to climate-related disasters and confronted with economic and fiscal challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated these issues, particularly for tourism-dependent economies of both regions, where women account for 50 to 75% of the workforce. And we know that in reality, women and girls are facing the brunt of gender-based violence, limited access to sexual and reproductive health services, and challenges to continued quality education, to name a few. Women leaders from both our regions, including all of us here today, are driving the global campaign for action to mitigate vulnerabilities to climate change impacts and effectively build forward equality from COVID-19. Women from the Pacific and Caribbean are increasingly taking on technical and professional responsibilities in marine and fisheries sectors to contribute to our ocean's knowledge and conservation. This event provides a platform for women leaders of all areas to share and engage in a cross-regional conversation at high level, and how this can be translated for women and girls in all across our oceans. While women and girls in all their diversity continue to participate in platforms such as this, we are aware that we are still absent in decision-making processes, further exacerbating gender inequalities. In this regard, I am delighted that this event is taking place, and I look forward to more cross-regional conversations. We stand to reaffirm that investing in women and girls' effective, meaningful, and equal participation in climate action and access to climate financing is critical, and this needs to happen. Particularly noting that women and girls continue to be disproportionately impacted by climate change and related disasters. It is because of this we need inclusive, accessible climate financing for small island developing states, including countries in the Blue Pacific and the Caribbean, that addresses renewable energy, infrastructure investments, oceans management, and climate resilience that has with gender lenses. Additionally, we also need gender-responsive policies and effective COVID-19 response and recovery initiatives in the context of the impacts of climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to working together in ensuring that the voices of women and girls are heard on issues on climate change, ocean management, and improving our livelihoods. And of course, Fiji is honored to participate in this event and congratulates the work done by the organizers in bringing us together here this morning. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Akbar. It's a real pleasure to hear from you this morning. It is now, apologies. I have gotten a cold from my children. I apologize. The care work continues. I would like to, well, I have the honor to now introduce Dr. Carla Natalie Barnett, the Secretary General of the Caribbean Community. Dr. Barnett, PhD, CBE, became the 8th Secretary General of the CARICOM Community on the 15th of August, 2021. Dr. Barnett is an economist who has worked across CARICOM for over 30 years. She was the first woman to be appointed as Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Belize, and the first woman and youngest person to be appointed as Deputy Secretary General of CARICOM. She was also Vice President Operations at the Caribbean Development Bank. As a consultant, Dr. Barnett has provided advisory services in public sector financial planning and strategic planning throughout CARICOM. As a politician, Dr. Barnett contested the 2015 Belize general election and was a senator and a minister of state in the Belize government from 2015 to 2020. She is an advocate for gender equality. I have known of Dr. Barnett and has been able to witness her advocacy for over 15 years as the right thing to do. She understands gender equality is the right thing to do to create a more stable and equitable society, and has good economic policy. Gender equality is good for business. She has been an active member of the Caribbean Institute of Women in Leadership, Belize chapter. She attended the first meeting when this institution was first organized. She's a president of the Belize YWCA and on the board of Haven House, a shelter for battered women. Dr. Barnett has received several awards, including the Commander of the British Empire for distinguished public service. So it's my honor now to hand over to Dr. Barnett as she provides reflections on all of our fantastic women leaders' statements.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, my young Caribbean sister, Tony Broadba. You know, you date yourself. If I were to tell you that I knew her mother before her, then you would know. Prime Minister of Samoa, Honorable Naomi Mataafa, Right Honorable Evelyn Weber-Crowes, Prime Minister of Aruba, Pacific Islands Forum Secretary General and Pacific Ocean Commissioner Henry Puna, Honorable Rosie Akbar of Fiji, other distinguished participants. It is such a pleasure to be here to listen to the strong women leaders who have taken the time to share some of the innovative strategies that they are leading the development of for our women, for our environment, and for our societies in a just and sustainable way. In Women's Month, which is coming to an end next week, there's a lot of discussion of women's issues and in varying contexts. And for those on this panel, I am sure you, like myself, would have been participating in several events and hearing some of these issues and contributing to some of the discussions. But this is something we can never tire of doing. These issues that women face bear repeating until we find effective strategies. With regard to the deepening impact of climate change, women are recognized as more vulnerable than men and boys, constituting, according to UN Women, 70% of the world's poor. Women are also 14 times more likely to die during disasters than men because of gender inequalities. Therefore, our plans, our projects, our policies should account for gender difference in their design and implementation so as not to reinforce, to exacerbate, or even to create greater gender inequalities. If we refuse to, if we do not integrate the concerns of women in particular and the gender differences that need to be taken into account, we can contribute to greater gender inequalities. In fact, the linkage between gender and climate change is a key component of the Paris Agreement. While it is encouraging that there has been an increase in climate finance with a gender component, more effort is needed to ensure that it reaches those who need it most. There is, in fact, very little transparency about the quality, the specific focus, and the impacts of climate change that have a gender component. According to UN Women Again, of the global amounts available in current funding cycles through NGOs, only 0.2%, or US 43 million of the US 2.4 billion, is being made available to women-led and women's rights organizations. There are major hurdles regarding the transparency and accountability of climate finance that promote gender equality, particularly because of a lack of appropriate data. So one of the things we have to encourage, we have to foster, is the collection, the capturing of sex-aggregated data, gender statistics, and gender responsive indicators. While some climate funds like the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund have made some strides, gender outcomes are not sufficiently integrated into the design, implementation, and monitoring of climate projects and programs to reduce gender vulnerabilities on the ground. So in all of the work that we heard today, in all of the work that we talk about, we need to ensure that moving forward, women's differentiated needs, knowledge, experiences must form a basis for the components that we use to inform investment in climate change and in the use of climate finance. But at an even broader level, we heard the call and we support the need to speak to the reality that access to climate finance is inequitable. It does not take into account the real vulnerabilities of SIDS, who do bear the largest burden of climate change, but are in fact responsible for an almost negligible contribution to the emissions that are the source of global warming that threaten the very existence of our countries and our peoples. As in the Pacific, the ocean climate nexus is important in the Caribbean. More than 50% of the Caribbean population live less than 1.5 kilometers from the shore, and every one of us is connected in some way to the sea. Like climate change generally, the health of the ocean has a differentiated impact on health and well-being. The pollution of the ocean affects all. However, we know that pregnant women and children are most sensitive to the toxic materials contained in fish, for example. And although women make up more than half of the workforce in processing, cleaning, and trading fish, in 2017, women accounted for only 20% of the fisherfolk. Typically, women in the fisheries sectors, like in other parts of the economy, are largely concentrated in the low-skilled, low-paid, seasonal jobs with lower levels of health, safety, and labor rights protection. So as we push for the development of the fisheries sectors, as some of us are doing, we need to ensure that we properly situate the role of women as workers in the fisheries industries and as operators of businesses in the fisheries sector. Gender equality considerations, therefore, also need to be mainstream in the development cooperation that we are involved in, targeting the oceans, supporting initiatives to protect coastal areas, and developing small-scale sustainable fishing that benefits local communities and help to decrease gender gaps. All of this, I believe, are important, and many of us in our countries, in the Caribbean and in the Pacific, are seeking to treat with the issues facing women as a result of climate change, and all of this needs to continue to be taken into account. And as I finish here, yes, Tony, I say it as often as I can, gender equality is good economic policy because, and it's wider than economic policy, it's good social and economic development policy because when we promote the development of women, when we promote business women, women in business, what we are doing is promoting the sustainability of whole families, of whole communities, and therefore we continue to promote that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, SG Barnett. Thank you to all of the panelists. Fiji hosted me for 2 years, and it was actually one of the places I reconnected with the chef de cabinet, Dr. Kramer of the CARICOM SG. And it was one of the places where it was very clear to see how important it is to understand our connection to the ocean, our connection to the environment, and preparation for what the impacts, even though we may not have directly contributed to what we're experiencing now in small island developing states, how we can be agents of change for the positive. I want to note that UN Women in the Caribbean has been working on climate and gender budgeting training. We've trained 67 senior technical leaders already, and the guidance document will be completed so that countries across the Caribbean, and we're always happy to collaborate with our colleagues in the Pacific, can also benefit from gender responsive climate budgets. And UN Women in the Caribbean and the Pacific are working on many things together, including better understanding mental and psychosocial services for adults, and geospatial analysis that understand how gender-based violence, poverty, and climate change come together. Because sometimes, while we need to be siloed and focused in our approaches to some of these socioeconomic issues, we also need to build on the synergies and see how they connect with one another. I thank you, Minister Akbar. I thank you, Prime Minister Weaver Crowes, Prime Minister Mataafa, and Dr. Barnett, SG of CARICOM, for this excellent panel. And I hand over to my colleague, a wonderful transformational woman herself, Sandra Bernklau, who will be leading the next section of our event.
Thank you so much, Tony and colleagues. I believe we'll be taking a short break here and featuring a video from a Pacific activist in climate change. Over to our colleagues at the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Talofa from the shores of beautiful Tuvalu Islands. It is my great honor to be speaking to you today, and I do not take for granted this opportunity to speak to you in Glasgow as you discuss the fate of the world and the fate of small island states, including those in the beautiful Pacific region. Climate change and sea level rise are deadly and existential threats to Tuvalu and low-lying atoll countries. We are sinking, but so is everyone else. And no matter if we feel the impacts today, like in Tuvalu, or in 100 years, we will all still feel the dire effects of this global crisis one day. In Tuvalu, our islands are sacred to us. They contain the mana of our people. They were the home of our ancestors. They are the home of our people today. And we want them to remain the home of our people into the future. This is why this call to you from Tuvalu is not just a political statement. It is a call that reverberates from our 8 islands and our 12,000 people to the international community. We are petitioning and demanding that global net zero be secured by mid-century, that 1.5 degrees be kept within reach, that urgently needed climate finance be mobilized to address loss and damage, and that there be greater accountability from all nations and peoples to act as good stewards of the earth. But we are also not going to wait for the world to get its act together. We are looking to the future and preparing now for the worst case scenario where our lands disappear and our people must leave. We will not stand idly by as the water rises around us. We're not just talking in Tuvalu, we are mobilizing collective action at home, in our region and on the international stage to secure our future. On the national level, we are pursuing bold legal avenues to ensure that Tuvalu's existing maritime boundaries will remain intact and we will be recognized as sovereign even if our land territory is lost to climate change. We are also rapidly adopting innovative digital tools and platforms to build a digital nation. New digitized systems will allow us to continue to fully function as a sovereign state regardless of land loss or relocation. At the regional level, we see the tremendous importance of platforms like the Pacific Climate Change Migration and Human Security Program and the Joint Working Group on Climate-Related Mobility, co-chaired by Tuvalu and Fiji. These platforms will provide Pacific-led arrangements to support climate-related migration that are informed by our unique cultures, values, and ways of life. Outside of our Pacific family, our global family is still critical to us, and we will not give up on COP. We will continue to promote our value of kaitasi, which refers to our shared responsibility to act in the best interest of the global community, and also the value of falepili, which represents our duty to act as good neighbors to all nations and peoples. We all have a responsibility at COP26 to address climate change and ensure that climate mobility. In Tuvalu, we are living the realities of climate change and sea level rise as you stand watching me today at COP26. We cannot wait for speeches when the sea is rising around us all the time. Climate mobility must come to the forefront. We must take bold, alternative action today to secure tomorrow. Faftailasi, Tuvalu Modetua.
Thank you, the Honorable Minister Kofe, the Minister for Justice and Foreign Affairs of Tuvalu, for that powerful video message. And again, thanking my colleague, Tony Broadburn, the UN Women Representative in the Caribbean, the previous moderator. Bulavanaka, and warm Pacific greetings from Suva, Fiji. I'm Sandra Bernklau. I'm the representative for UN Women in the Pacific, and I'm the moderator for the next part of this side event. Just reflecting on and acknowledging the inspiring and informative opening remarks from the Prime Minister of Samoa, the Honorable Fiame Naomi Nataafa, the Right Honorable Prime Minister of Aruba, Evelyn Weaver-Croes, the Fiji Minister for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, the Honorable Rosie Akbar, as well as the Secretary Generals of the Caribbean Community and the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat. Also acknowledging with thanks and gratitude the partnership that put this fantastic event together, the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat colleagues, CARICOM colleagues, my colleagues at the UN Women Caribbean Office, and thanks to the partners in this event, including the Office of the Pacific Oceans Commission, the Pacific Community, Foreign Fisheries Agency, and the Government of the Netherlands. I'm absolutely delighted to moderate this part of the side event, which features women champions and activists from the Pacific and the Caribbean that are leading actions across the ocean climate nexus. We'll be requesting all panelists to share their brief perspectives, following by a key question. And following all the panelist interventions, we'll be opening the floor for questions with a general Q&A session. I will introduce all panelists now, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them before they speak. All panelists will be giving a 3-minute overview of their work, and then they'll be responding to 1 or 2 questions on how their leadership is making a difference in the fight against climate change. Our first panelist is Dr. Manu Tupurusan, the Director General of the Foreign Fisheries Agency, followed by Ms. Ruth Spencer, the Chair of the Marine Ecosystems Protected Area from Antigua and Barbuda. Our third panelist is Ms. Evangelista Apollos, the Director and Public Officer at Sea Women of Melanesia, followed by our fourth panelist, Ms. Aisha Constable, who is the Global Advisor to FRIDA, the Young Feminist Fund. And then our fifth and final panelist is Ms. Elshun Hideos, the Youth Community Education Program Coordinator of the Ebel Society in Palau. I'm absolutely honored to be here amongst these panelists who are doing diverse and powerful work all of which align, of course, to UN Women's work, specifically the work we do on women's resilience to disasters, a program that has just been launched with the Government of Australia. I want to apologize in advance to the panelists. We do need to keep interventions down to 3 minutes. And just to remind, we want to have a really robust Q&A session following this. So without further ado, our first panelist is the Director General of the Forum Fisheries Agency, Dr. Manu. She is the first woman to be appointed as the Director General of the Pacific Islands Forum Fisheries Agency. And she brings extensive experience in fisheries, having worked in the field for over 20 years, including a decade as the Forum Fisheries Agency legal counsel. She has a Master's of Law with first-class honors, as well as a PhD in law. And her PhD focused on international and regional fisheries compliance. Dr. Manu will be providing us a 3-minute overview of the role of regional agencies, regional agencies in working towards achieving climate ambition. And more specifically, she'll share the experience of the Forum Fisheries Agency. Dr. Manu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Honorable leaders and distinguished participants, at the outset, we thank our hosts, the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat and the Caribbean community, for this valuable opportunity to meet with women leaders in the Pacific and the Caribbean who are championing the ocean climate nexus. It is an honor for FFA to speak to this important event. For over a decade, every year, our Pacific leaders have reiterated that climate change is the single greatest threat to the livelihood, security, and well-being of our people. They have also championed the Blue Pacific identity for our region through a 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent to drive collective action. This sets a clear framing for our regional organizations who are actively collaborating to support our leaders and members in championing ways to tackle the impacts of climate change, with a particular focus on the special nature of our region, the Blue Continent. As with everything that we do, the key is cooperation. In order to succeed, we must draw together all of our regional expertise, experience, and innovation. Our partner regional organizations, SPREP, PIFs, SPC, USP, and our collective task forces all bring their own rich and valuable assistance to support our members. Like our friends from the Caribbean and other states, our island countries barely contribute to the total greenhouse gas emissions. For the Pacific, it is less than 0.03%, and yet we bear the frontline impacts of climate change, such as increasing natural disasters and rising in sea levels. We are also the least equipped to cope with these impacts. We recognize that our vulnerabilities and constraints as SIDS in addressing climate change are similar regardless of geographical location. We also recognize that the absence of women in decision-making and approaches to climate change and disaster risk reduction will continue to exacerbate gender inequalities. We recognize that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by disasters and threats such as climate change. Further, that a huge portion of women in our region rely on the free and healthy coastal food sources to feed their families. Many of these resources are becoming degraded and washed away as a result of growing climate impacts. This means that to achieve sustainable development, to actively pursue and achieve climate ambitions, we must bring everyone with us, including women and girls. Climate ambition needs to be viewed from a few key aspects, such as greater ambition from the biggest polluters, much greater mobilization of climate finance that is more easily accessible to underpin urgent needs in our region, continuing to promote women into leadership and decision-making roles, and taking a firm stance on the impacts of sea level rise on our maritime boundaries. In the interest of time, I'll highlight two key regional examples. First, as highlighted by the Honorable Prime Minister Fiami Naomi Mataafa of Samoa, one key regional example is our Pacific Leaders' Declaration on Preserving Maritime Zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. The declaration is the first of its kind and states that once a maritime boundary has been formalized in accordance with the Law of the Sea Convention, it stands. The second example is, as referred to by other distinguished speakers, that the Pacific people, we are proud custodians of our ocean. Our ocean is our lifeline. At FFA, the collaborative management of the Pacific tuna fishery is another important regional example of work towards climate ambition. Our region is home to the largest tuna fisheries in the world and the only one that has all major tuna stocks assessed as biologically healthy. Our Western and Central Pacific Ocean contributes over 50% of the world's tuna supply. Tuna is an important contributor to our livelihoods and socioeconomic goals. The stakes are always high, and this will only increase over time. The latest climate change impacts show that by 2050, we could lose up to 20% of license revenues. So we will continue to progress the work. We greatly appreciate this opportunity to enhance collaboration with our Caribbean friends and looking forward to our further discussion. And always remembering why we do what we do and why we must give it our best. Our ocean, our children, our future. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manu, and your experience. You just bring such a wealth of experience to the region, and congratulations again on your appointment. I think what you've said, you've highlighted a number of different things. One is the collaboration across the different crop agencies, and that is so powerful in the Pacific. And the other is the specific role of women in fisheries in the Pacific. There are very specific roles, traditional fishing roles for women. So how do we get more women involved in fisheries at senior levels like yourself? What are some of the things that we can all collectively work on to open those avenues up for women in decision making? Because as you pointed out, it's incredibly important to progress actions in both preserving the fishing industry in the region, as well as addressing climate change.
Thank you, Sandra. And that's a really important question as to how we at FFA or any of us can promote the leadership of women in fisheries. I'm going to highlight a point that was raised by the Honorable Prime Minister of Samoa, which relates to budgets, the important role that it holds in funding any of the critical priorities. So if we say that gender equality, if we say that climate resilience is really important to us, one of the first steps that we could take is within our own budgets as organizations or our budgets as countries, investing in the types of initiatives that can assist women to gain leadership roles or to have more senior roles in fisheries, and also within communities, not just fisheries per se. I'm going to use two examples, Sandra, to highlight where we do that from the FFA space. One is in terms of increasing the financial literacy and attendance of women in work. One example is that over 70% of women work in our processing plants. And you could find that towards the end of the month, before the next pay, that there's a lot of absenteeism. And this is because they are also mothers. They are also providers for their families and communities. So the paycheck does not last the month, and they need to take shorter jobs such as selling flowers or other means to get quick cash for the family. So the financial literacy training that is being provided through FFA could also help towards that. And we're not the first one in this space. We recognize that our partner organizations, they also carry out important work with financial literacy with our women. In terms of promoting, the second example, in terms of promoting women into leadership roles in fisheries, there's been a lot of work to promote this in the private sector. There's been immense success with the inclusion of Australian accredited certificate in women leadership and management in Papua New Guinea and later in the Solomon Islands in terms of training of women. And it's our intention to promote a similar concept, but tailored specifically to our fisheries private sector, and engage a registered training organization to expand access to management and leadership training for women in the fisheries sector. I've used those two examples, but another exciting initiative is that, you know, the fisheries sector is very much male dominated. So we're working towards all female fishing crew. And this is an initiative that we're still progressing with one of our member countries, set back a bit by the COVID period, but we're determined that we could see this through. And I'll just wrap that up, Sandra, by saying that those are just 3 examples, but we ourselves, in whatever position that we hold, that we're privileged to hold, we can all do our own personal steps to help women within our organizations or within our communities to challenge them to take those leadership roles, to take that bold step. Even for myself personally, it wasn't always the easiest step to take, but like I said, we remember why we do what we do, and it's because of our children, our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mano, and I'm so glad you did take that step. You know, those are excellent examples, and the example about budgeting, you know, holding our leaders accountable, holding our organizations accountable, our own projects accountable, making sure that gender equality measures and actions are actually budgeted for. You know, we always say that's where the rubber hits the road in gender equality. If you see it on a budget and it's measurable and it can be implemented. But I loved your examples about the literacy, the financial literacy training, you know, getting them in voice and agency around the income that they earn and having more of a voice in the workplace, absolutely critical. And I love the example about the all-female fishing crew. I look forward to hearing more about that and seeing further examples moving forward. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Ruth Spencer. Ruth's interests are in appropriate technologies that make life better for the people and contribute to a cleaner environment. She's received awards from the government of Antigua and Barbuda for energy, climate change, and the environment. She was nominated for the CARICOM Energy Personality Award and was awarded the National Energy Globe Award for Antigua and Barbuda. She's a passionate advocate for working with local communities on environmental solutions and positive change. And on February 22nd, she was appointed to the board of directors of Yale International Alliance. Ruth will be giving us a 3-minute perspective on innovative climate resilience projects that address climate change and the ocean. Ruth, the floor is yours. Oh, I'm sorry, Ruth. I don't think we can hear you. Unfortunately, oh, there we go.
Are you hearing me? Are you
There is
hearing
some
me?
reverberation, but now we can hear you. I believe you're on mute now, Ruth. Okay, what we'll do, Ruth, is we'll move on to the next speaker, if you don't mind, and hopefully we can have your sound challenges sorted out in the interim. Sorry about that, Ruth. So our next speaker is Evangelista Apollos. Evangelista is born and raised in Madang, Papua New Guinea, an area of incredible biodiversity. She grew up close to the sea with a passion for natural sciences. She has a bachelor's of science in biology, and in 2019, she was a KTF Archer Scholarship recipient before joining the Sea Women of Melanesia as the director and public officer based in Port Moresby. She has won the UN Environmental Program Champions of the Earth Award in 2021, and her work aims to empower women in Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands with training, skills, and resources needed to take an active role in supporting Indigenous communities to create and manage marine protected areas. Evangelista will be providing a brief 3-minute overview on the role of grassroots Pacific women's climate activism. Evangelista, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. Good morning, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to be given this opportunity to share my perspectives on behalf of the Sea Women of Melanesia. Let me start by saying this. I truly believe that in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and tackle climate change issues in the Pacific, greater emphasis must be placed on indigenous and local knowledge and the inclusion of women and girls as an integral part of any strategy that we use. I'm saying this because the foundations of Pacific livelihoods and the measure of our success is deeply embedded in our culture, our environment, and most importantly, our people. So there are many areas of the region who have traditionally been matrilineal, meaning women own and manage the land and they pass it on to their daughters. However, this has gradually been changed over the years. And these days we're seeing matrilineal disappearing in some parts of the Pacific and some of the areas that we're currently working in. But I'm proud to say that Pacific women are some of the most resilient and hardworking women in the world, and they play an essential role in managing their homes and sustaining livelihoods. So the role of the grassroots Pacific women's activism is to ensure there are a diversity of voices in decision-making at a local level, and that women take ownership of their resources. So the grassroots women activism also, it provides the tools and sets a path for women and girls to positively influence their family, their society, and ultimately the country as a whole, to sustainably exploit their natural resources, drive conservation and climate action at the grassroots level or local level with whatever resources they may have. And it also challenges and breaks some of the norms that may have impeded women, like the cultural norms that may have impeded women and girls from having access to equal opportunities. I would like to finish off with my view that the bottom-up approach or the grassroots level of addressing the issues of climate change and it works well for women in marginalized areas in the Pacific. And for instance, with the work that we're doing with the Sea Women of Melanesia, we've been able to apply that approach in the remote islands such as Tube in the engineering group of islands in Milne Bay province. And we've seen like positive results in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evangelista. It was excellent to hear the work that you're doing. And I really liked, that intersection between women's resilience and the knowledge that they bring to the environment, as well as the traditional role that women played in some areas as traditional custodians of the land. And I love the point that you made that when women are leading in the area of climate change and marine conservation, it does change some of the harmful social norms that we have around gender equality and shows women in leadership roles. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about that from you. you know, some of the examples that you might have from the Sea Women of Melanesia's experience in marine conservation, you know, some of the examples of women taking leadership roles in the work that you do. Back to you.
Thank you. I would be happy to share a number of experiences that we've experienced during our work. In most of the communities that we visit, men tend to be like, they take ownership of the land and the resources. So when we approach those communities, women tend to take they step back and they want the men to make decisions on their behalf. So the approach that the Sea Women of Melanesia program is trying to take is not only to give the skills and training to the women to conduct monitoring of their own coral reef ecosystem, but also to give them that platform to actually come out of their comfort zones and be in a position where they can be vocal about some of the issues concerning their communities. So there was a particular community that we visited, and in our experience, like, the Sea Women of Melanesia program, it provides like opportunities for women to learn basic snorkeling, so they can then go back to their own communities. We also train them like basic camera technique skills, where they use cameras to capture images of the coral reefs. So that's how they monitor their own coral reefs. So there are some communities that is the taboo for women to actually dive and swim. So it's very challenging when we go out to those communities. We try to really encourage them, like like most of them, they benefit more from the sea. So we try to make them understand that times have changed. Some of our cultural norms needs to also be changed to cater for the demands that are at hand. And mind you, most of the women, especially in Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, they are unemployed and they depend on their husbands to provide for them. So the program tries to empower them, tries to make them take ownership of their resources, and to also see that women can also contribute to the table, and they can also influence decision making in their own communities as well. So these are some of the experiences that the challenges, as well as experience for us going into the communities and engaging with especially women.
Thank you so much, Evangelista. Those are excellent examples. And I love the concrete skills of documentation, of taking leadership roles. And it also goes with what Dr. Manu was saying, you know, coming out of the comfort zone and really speaking out and taking a leadership role. And I guess, you know, in Melanesia, where there were so many matrilineal societies, it's really reclaiming that traditional role of custodian as well. So that was excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Miss Aisha Constable. Aisha has paired her activism along with her scholarship and has researched extensively on youth and gender and climate change within the context of climate justice, contributing to global and regional policy and academic discourse on climate change. She is founder of the Young People for Action on Climate Change Jamaica, which is leading a movement-led approach in the building of climate justice youth coalition in the Caribbean, and founded Girls Care, Girls for Climate Action and Resilience and Empowerment. And she recently received funding from Rihanna's Clara Lionel Foundation to continue the work in climate justice. Aisha will be providing a 3-minute perspective on the importance of cross-regional alliances and how this can amplify issues relating to climate change and the ocean. Over to you, Aisha. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Good evening, good morning. A special good evening, good morning to the esteemed panelists, speakers that would have spoken in the earlier segment, to my fellow panelists, and to all of the participants on the call. Hopefully I haven't expended my 3 minutes with that. But it's really such a thrill to be able to share this space. I believe that even my participation in this conversation is testament to the value of cross-regional collaboration. So this opportunity for us to share experiences and have dialogue is true to the vision that feminists have of working in this way, building these strong alliances. I made a few key points that I'm going to try my best to stick to not go over the 3 minutes. But it's important, or it's rather timely that this is being convened a day after we launched the second installment of Girls Care, the initiative that you just mentioned, Sandra, Girls Climate Action for Resilience and Empowerment would have launched that yesterday. And our speaker was Noeline Nabivalu. I apologize again for butchering that surname. A name well recognized in the feminist space and in the Pacific for sure. And the opportunity provided to me to even connect with Noeline initially was similar to this. And I was so inspired by the work of feminist activists in the Pacific, like some of the fiercest activists I've come across are from the Pacific region. And so, being able to connect with Noeline, being able to connect with the community of feminist activists in the Pacific gives me an opportunity, or gives us in this space an opportunity to learn, to share ideas, to share knowledge, to share good practices. And like I said to Noeline yesterday, it was also an opportunity for that flame and fire in our bellies for this work to be fanned, because there's so much power that comes at every time I hear a Pacific feminist speak. There's this authenticity and this power that resonates. And similarly, my earliest experiences as a young woman and a young activist in climate spaces was in working with young people from the Pacific at an initiative called Global Power Shift, which was hosted in Turkey a couple years ago. And I remember being very, new to the space, and, all of the performative things that needed to happen, and the stoic nature of the space was a little bit intimidating for a young Black girl from the Caribbean. And I remember Pacific activists coming out in these body wraps, toga looking attire, and performing this powerful haka that just transformed the atmosphere in the space. And I cried. So I cried at that particular moment, and I had goose pimples for the entirety of it. And I was reminded of the power again in that moment of being authentic, of bringing your true self to the space. And I think connecting again with people from other parts of the world, and in this case, the Pacific, gave young people like myself, young people from other parts of the global South, confirmation that and validation that it was okay to be here, and it's okay to be your true self. It's okay to bring your culture into this space. It's okay to be joyous. It's okay to show up. And those are some of the experiences I've had interacting directly with persons from the Pacific, and the takeaways from that experience, from those experiences, and having been able to now channel them into the work that I'm doing, working with young people, working in feminist spaces across the Caribbean and the global South. A similar experience was had while working with young women from Latin America. And so, one of the takeaways from the Latin America experience is the challenges that other young people face working what are sometimes difficult political environments, but the commitment to that effort. So Latin America for me is the political context and the challenges there, but they continue to show up. And Pacific is a confirmation of the value of integrating culture, the value of integrating authenticity into activism and into this work. And lastly, I'll add to that, I was reminded recently while participating in a seminar of Pacific Islanders, I believe, as activists, as well as with some Caribbean folk, about the work that's being done around deep sea mining in the Pacific and the work of the women again in that space. And the reminder there was the importance of understanding the challenges the issues that other activists in other parts of the world are championing and supporting that cause. The value of championing the cause, even though it is not immediately a challenge that we, Caribbean feminists are speaking to, but, supporting that, enhancing and strengthening that movement, that's a cause that is true and critical, that Pacific women are speaking to, and just lending support so that, no, I don't believe any feminist in any part of the world, whatever the cause is, should be feeling alone, and feeling like you don't have the full support of your sister allies across the world. And so this, for me, again, cross-regional collaboration alliances is everything to the movement, because when you get tired and you get a Noeline in your space to remind you of the importance and the value of this work, you are rejuvenated and refueled to continue.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Your activism and passion really comes out, and I just loved your intervention. You made me weep a little bit there. We all know the power of our Pacific feminist, Noeline Nambulevo in particular, who is just incredible. And the importance of sharing the fire and the flame, as you rightly said, and the need for sister solidarity across our blue oceans and our green continents. And I definitely value the Pacific Caribbean connection and the connection of small island developing states and the power of connecting together on these really critical issues. And I loved what you said about culture. There's no disentanglement in the Pacific. The culture together with the oceans, it's beyond words. It's a spiritual connection of how deep Pacific people feel about their connection to oceans and land, and it does come out in activism, and it's really important that it does come out as well. I liked your example about deep sea mining and some of the struggles and activism around that. Did you have any other examples of some of the issues that have been shared across these regional alliances? Is there any other particular examples that you'd want to share with us?
Yes, I think another successful initiative that we have collaborated on in such a manner is the 1.5 to Stay Alive campaign. I believe that in the lead up to COP20, it was one of the COPs, I believe it was in Paris, where that campaign was initiated and led largely by young people in the Global South. The Pacific voices and the Caribbean voices were very instrumental in carrying that message through. I remember being in Paris. I remember the support and the dancing and the fanfare around it. I remember the energy around it. And again, just even in this case, the love of cultures between the Caribbean and the Pacific, and that, synergy in that way being such a powerful tool to carry that message forward. I remember negotiators from other parts of the world singing and dancing as they passed by the pavilions. But that particular campaign, I believe, was successful because of the cultural synergy shared, the commitment from the two regions, but more importantly, because of that shared message and commitment to it to really carry it forward. At the moment, there's another initiative that we are seeing some traction around and support from Pacific feminist activists on. It's an initiative that is seeking to support movement-led actions for climate justice with feminist activist climate justice work in the Caribbean and the Pacific, in other parts of the world as well, but we're working closely and looking closely at the models that are being developed in the Pacific, because again, I think the Pacific has gotten that right so many times. We can truly feel comfortable, looking to those models and adapting those models to the Caribbean context. So those are two specific areas, I believe, again, that with the combined strength and collective energy of both regions, we've seen and will see significant success.
Excellent. Thanks so much for those examples. I do remember the 1.5 to Stay Alive, and it just speaks again to the power of solidarity across the SIDS. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your interventions, Aisha. We're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Elhung Hideos, who's hailing from the beautiful country of Palau. Elhung has a BA in Environmental Studies from the University of Honolulu. She's worked with the Ebil Society, which is a national conservation NGO, In 2019, she received a scholarship to undertake global environmental studies in Japan, with her master's thesis focusing on women's fisheries management, conservation, and policy in Palau. She's now heading the new research program, creating new research projects that integrate ecology and the social sciences with a focus on intergenerational and indigenous knowledge. Ms. Hideos will provide a brief 3-minute overview of the role of young women leaders in addressing climate change through activism or advocacy. The floor is yours, Elhun.
Hello, thank you, Ms. Sandra, and just good morning and good evening to all the speakers and guests here today. It's an honor to be able to be on this panel as well as learn from other women leaders around the world, around the Pacific and Caribbean. As a matrilineal society in Palau, women and girls have specific roles in the Palauan society, which include taking care of our families and our communities. I've come to realize in the past 5 years of working with a Bail society that teaching environmental issues through traditional knowledge gives us youth a better understanding of what it was like before and how it has changed over time due to climate change and other anthropogenic impacts. This also includes giving us a better understanding, a better idea of what it means to be Palauan. Scientific research is just as important as learning from our elders, from their experiences and observations in nature. Us youth need to make it a priority to learn more from our elders and learn our traditional knowledge in addition to having that scientific understanding to really be able to make change in our communities. I believe that small changes can have large impacts. For example, if we had a 4th grader who does tree planting with us in our programs, they will understand and learn the benefits of planting a tree and how it can help mitigate climate change. And they can end up going back home, and if they see their parent cutting down a tree, they can actually stop them and scold them and say, hey, mom or dad, this is not right. And that can actually really bring change to the adults as well, to be like, wow, our youth, our kids are actually learning the importance of what small changes like planting a tree can do. And just some of my experience with Abil, we've started up a new research decolonizing research class to expand on more research for the youth, Palauan youth, to learn about the natural resource management and traditional Palauan knowledge with the scientific research in order for us to really understand those different changes throughout the years, throughout the times. And yes, I think that I will close with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That just sounds so incredibly important and interesting. I love the idea of decolonizing research. And I loved what you said about, science isn't enough. We have to also look at traditional indigenous knowledge. We have to listen to our elders to find out about, strategies around resilience that were already in place that often don't get picked up, especially when we're all studying in Western universities. So I loved those examples. Thank you so much. And I loved what you said about engaging youth as well. So I guess my question too is, how do we make sure that there's still more women leadership in this space? Like in Palau, how are you engaging women in this space? Are there many women engaged in and leading in environmental sciences and leading in climate change? How are you making sure that young girls are interested in this and being engaged as well?
Thank you for your question. I think for me, I've really enjoyed our educational programs that work with kids in schools, but also during the summer, we have summer camps, and really being able to bring our young girls into these programs so that they can learn what it means to be a Palauan girl, a woman, what are their roles in the society, as well as how they can be a mentor or a leader in our issues today. For example, the decolonizing research class. Last year, we had the first cohort and 5 students completed that first cohort, and they were all young girls. So that was very nice to see. And it really is just, I have the joy. I really get excited with teaching kids, even though I never really thought I could be a teacher. But I really enjoy working with kids and their excitement, and even my excitement in the things that I learned today. And that's really what makes me passionate about working with women. And as well as my research for my master's, I actually decided to focus on women's fisheries because of the lack of policies and regulations supporting their fisheries in terms of marine invertebrate harvesting. And that's what I really noticed with working at A Bead Society, with our executive director being a woman, and really seeing how women in directive roles in Palau really have shown me that we have a strong role and responsibility as women of Palau to really continue on that practice and education.
Oh, that's just fantastic. And I'm so excited to hear that the first 5 coming out of the decolonizing research were all young women. So obviously you're an inspiring and influential teacher yourself. So thank you, and kudos to you and your work there. Now, colleagues, we missed out on Ruth, who is the chair of the Marine Ecosystems Protected Areas Trust from Antigua and Barbuda. I think Ruth now has her speaker and microphone working. So Ruth, if I can give you the floor, please. I think we may have lost Ruth. Hopefully we can give her the floor again when she comes back. But let's deal with some of the questions. We've received a lot of questions, both in the chat and some were sent in ahead of time. So thank you to everybody who sent in questions. We're going to try and honor all of them if we can. Now we have a question specifically for the esteemed panelists from the Caribbean. And that question is, how can the Escazu agreement contribute as a tool to gender equality in climate action? Any of our Caribbean panelists, would you be able to answer that?
I think that question was really designed for Ms. Spencer. So I really hope she comes back. But I can say that the governments of the Caribbean, at least some of them, have signed the Escazu agreement, and the agreement itself, as you probably are well aware, speaks to providing opportunities and access to decision-making and participation in decision-making, access to information, access to justice, particularly environmental justice for all. I think the experience of, say, Latin America, where you have outright violence against environmental defenders, is very different from the Caribbean experience. But that's not to say that in the Caribbean you do not have, and I think Ruth might be back, and if she's back, she'll correct me. It's not to say that we do not have antagonism and other ways in which environmental defenders are victimized, right? And so the Escazu agreement is seeking to address that. However, we are seeing where there is not enough traction and action by governments to ratify and operationalize the agreement. And so there's a symbolic signing by a few governments, but it has not been operationalized. And even beyond signing, there are a lot of facilities that have to be put in place, structures, systems, processes to make that work. I think it needs a fulsome commitment from policymakers, decision makers, highest levels of decision making to actually make it an effective agreement to address the issues that we're seeing, and a lot of education as well, because if environmental defenders, activists are not aware that this is in place to support them and how to access it, then it fails to do what it is set up to do. So yes, it is an excellent opportunity to address those ills and wrongs towards environmental defenders. However, there are steps that need to be taken to make it effective in that regard. And Ms. Spencer is back just in time.
Thank you so much, Aisha. That's fantastic. And it's really great to learn about that agreement. I know we don't have an equivalent in the Pacific. Now, Ruth, are you able to come on? Let's see if we can have Ruth speak.
Are you hearing me? Okay, thank you.
Ruth, we still have a problem with your sound. It's still reverberating.
God has blessed me with a voice which I want to continue to use for strong and bold advocacy so that the local grassroots community voices can be heard. These are the groups I work with to empower, to build capacities and strengthen their institutions. We are the local knowledge holders with evidence and results in community-based adaptation work, and this is based on sustainable practices, collective actions, and observations. We drive change, and we deliver social impacts that helps to heal, maintain peace, and reduce suffering. It is time for the ideas, solutions, and the innovations for climate resilience and adaptation to come from them. Let's use our gender lens to see all the perspectives that can come from all of society. I'm thinking about the public, the disabled, those with HIV/AIDS, the LGBT groups. All of society must be included in decision-making. When we are designing our programs and projects for climate, who are we listening to? Who is giving the information? I think it's time, as the climate changes, that our roles and responsibilities must change also. We have to come out of our silos and we think and we imagine and we shape new visions through that all of society lens. I am asking, I am pushing for meaningful and greater inclusion and participation in decision making. This is how we will move forward through the all of society approach. Projects that are designed for us must have our inputs, must have our ideas. We know what will work for us at the local level. And it's important that the project designs come to us for information. If not, serious mistakes will be made, especially in the environmental area. And when we make these mistakes, they cannot be remedied. Just give us information on a timely basis. These are some of the environmental and social safeguards that are required to ensure benefits and not harm to our population and to environment. Recently, we have been having a lot of ill-informed and ill-advised development, and it threatens our survival, the destruction of our mangroves, the rampant cutting of trees for hotel and commercial development is not the way, because it does not contribute to biodiversity, ecosystem restoration, or it just contributes maybe to profit for few, but the masses of the people, their lives are getting worse. I must congratulate our men and our local community people for the high values of pro bono work, passionate, wholehearted service, and voluntary work put into managing our biodiversity, which reduces the impacts of climate change, our pilots in waste reduction, reuse, repurposing, so that our oceans remain clear. Our work as environmental stewards, defending and protecting our lands, are exceptional, and many have died in the process. We have to defend our lands, our trees, the coastlines along our beaches, so that when climate change impacts increase, when sea level start to rise, we have a mitigation plan. The data from the IP-based biodiversity scientists show that 30% of the world's biodiversity is being protected by the indigenous people and local communities. Can you imagine if we had to pay these custodians to do even more? Why do they do it? It's because of their love, their value, their passion, their empathy for people and nature. Let us build a culture of inclusion, compassion, and human values so that we can all put our lives on the front line to protect our ecosystems, to protect people, and to protect nature. This is how we ensure clean water, a healthy and a sustainable environment. Let us value our heroes. Let us now invest in people. Business as usual approach will not work. We now have to look for sustainable people-centered development. Let us be open and transparent with our processes, and let us embrace a new vision of people, our health, and the environment. Thank you.
Ruth, I'm so glad we got to hear from you. Your intervention was really, really inspiring and absolutely spot on. We cannot move forward if we don't include everybody in decision-making and planning right at the get-go before any decisions are made. You know, that's such a really key and critical point. I just want to ask the organizers, do we have any time left for any further Q&A? I know there's a lot of you know, questions that we have in the chat. We have just 3 more minutes. Oh gosh, okay. So we have time for 2 more questions. Thank you so much. Okay, I know that we have some specific questions here. I have a question for Dr. Manu now in the Pacific. So taking us back from the Caribbean to the Pacific, with our richness of culture and tradition that we wish to celebrate and in part preserve, and in parallel, our deep desire towards developing modernity and sustainable economies and prosperity for people, what steps can be taken to expand our grassroots to national level conceptions of leadership, to value feminine qualities of leadership? Over to you, Dr. Manu. It's a complex question.
Thank you, Sandra. It's a complex question, but a really important one. And I'll start. And you know, we've just heard from some really wonderful women across the Pacific and the Caribbean, and I'm sure that they would be able to add to this. I think that at the heart of the question is our culture and our tradition, whilst we are looking to develop and modernize. And I'll be frank, I've never seen us having to make a choice between the two. I think that what we bring from our culture and our tradition enriches how we progress, how we develop, whether it's within the family and our children or within the organization or the community. So it's never been about a choice. I think that it wouldn't make sense to leave one in order to modernize. And I think the question also went to how we expand grassroots to value feminine. I didn't catch all of it, but I think I get the gist of the question on just what we bring to the conversation. And I think all the points that have been made today just highlight how important it is that decision-making, that planning. And the last point that you've made, and especially the point from Ruth from the get-go, having women at the table. The Honorable Prime Minister from Aruba also highlighted that point. So being part of the conversation and taking those bold steps to seat yourself at the table and to help make that change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manu, for taking on that question. And I'm glad, I loved your response. It doesn't have to be a choice. We can do both. Absolutely. It doesn't have to be one. We often get asked that question in the gender equality space. If we give more rights to women, are we taking rights away from men? No, we can do both. And gender equality benefits both equally. We also have another question in the chat. There's been a repeated dehumanization of Indigenous knowledge across the Pacific and the Caribbean. So how can we work towards decolonizing research methods and integrating societal bodies of knowledge? Our previous speaker, Elkun from Palau, talked a little bit about that. She's had to leave the panel. But do any other panelists want to tackle that question? How do we decolonize research methods, making sure that we're also using feminist research as well? Any panelists want to take that question on?
I might start by just saying that as a first step towards doing that, or that process of decolonization research, we have to first decolonize institutions within which that research is conducted. And in the Caribbean, as much as we are independent nations, sovereign nations, the thread or the impacts and the legacy of colonialism run very deep. And nowhere is it more present and evident than in some of these academic institutions. A lot of the ideas and ideals around research and around academia are rooted in those colonial ideologies. And so I think that's an important starting point. I believe it's also very important that the idea of expertise and knowledge is reimagined, so this notion that there's a single truth to anything that takes away from the opposite notion of the plurality of knowledge, which is something that feminists advocate for, recognizing that there are different ways in which we can see and think and understand any single scenario. And additionally, a lot of the academic writing that we see, even about our own stories and experiences, are generated by foreigners. Right, and they come out of publishing houses and journals that are run by foreigners. And so a part of the work that has to be done on our end as a part of that process of decolonization is that we tell our own stories, write our own papers, frame our own experiences, and again, set that stage for the reimagining of knowledge, for the reimagining of research processes and outputs.
Thank you so much, Aisha. That was an excellent response. And it's true. It's about telling our own stories and our own experiences from the context of within our own cultures and our relationships to the environment and to the climate crisis as well. Thank you so much for that. Colleagues, unfortunately, I have the task of both thanking the amazing and inspiring panelists who have been on with us. I'm very honored to be amongst this group of women. Our panelists, Dr. Manu Tuporusan, thank you so much. Miss Ruth Spencer, thank you again. The third panelist, Evangelista Apollos, Aisha Constable, as well as Elkun Hideos, not to mention the incredible and inspiring speakers that we had previously. We had, again, the Prime Minister of Samoa, the Right Honorable Prime Minister of Aruba, the Fiji Minister for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, and the Secretary Generals of the Caribbean Community and PIFs. Very difficult to sum up the second part of the panel, but what I can say is that we absolutely cannot address the climate crisis without the inclusion, the full inclusion of women and girls at all levels and at all stages of decision making. And we need to especially consider Indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge and culture in taking that forward, resilience and local solutions to resilience. Some of the solutions are already there, already being practiced. And also the cross-regional solidarity between the Pacific and the Caribbean, really incredibly important. And as Ruth rightly pointed out, we have to leave no one behind and include everybody in decision-making right from the get-go when we're planning our strategies and interventions. And as Dr. Manu pointed out, if it isn't in the budget, it's not there. So we need to make sure that gender equality across the climate crisis is funded and budgeted for. I want to thank you all once again on behalf of this consortium of fantastic partnerships, the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, CARICOM, the Secretariat of the Pacific Community, as well as the Oceans Commission, the Forum Fisheries Agency, UN Women, and the Government of the Netherlands. Thank you so much, colleagues.